Good afternoon. On behalf of State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister and the Oklahoma State Department of Education, I'm Tom Kirk, and Dan Rule and I would like to welcome you to our webinar on the Home Language Survey and Bilingual and EL Identification for the 2019-2020 school year. And this will be followed by a presentation on the new ELAP form, or the English Language Academic Plan form. So with that, let's begin. Oh, that's us right there. Okay, first thing, identification. Districts are required to identify English learners, which will be referred to almost always here as ELs, in a timely and reliable manner. And the identification process begins with the Home Language Survey, often marked here as just HLS. And the Home Language Survey assists in fulfilling federal requirements under ESSA to identify potential English language learners. The general rules concerning the Oklahoma Home Language Survey are as follows. A survey completed in the 2016-2017 school year or later can follow a student as long as that student remains in the district where the survey was completed. The Home Language Survey was overhauled in that year, so surveys done prior to that would be kind of disregard. So beginning with 2016-2017, those can stay with the student. Students are required to complete a new survey if they move to a new district or if they return to a district after an absence of more than 1 year.
And Tom, I'd just like to add one point here in terms, and because we get this question a lot, how fast? Generally speaking, a student needs to at the beginning of the year, at the outset of the year, the district has 30 calendar days to identify a student as EL. After that 30 days, the district has 2 weeks. So it's best practice to get these home language surveys in your enrollment packets for all your new incoming students and get them processed and hopefully your students identified as quickly as possible.
Okay. Completed surveys then are stored with the student's cumulative folder or in an accessible digital format. Districts must have a completed home language survey on file or accessible in digital form for every student. Then on the home language survey itself, the answers provided are not what determines EL status, but they do indicate which students are to be screened with the WIDA assessment. Then it's the WIDA assessment and only the WIDA assessment that is used to determine English language learner status. And there is a copy of the home language survey, of an approved home language survey, on our website that can be accessed in both English and in Spanish on the Title 3A page of the State Department of Education website. And I have the address down here, sde.ok.gov/title-Roman numeral 3. And Dan, did you want to weigh in here?
And I just wanted to reiterate that point, that it seems to be a perennial issue that there are always going to be a couple districts in the state that feel that just because the student answered Spanish on the home language survey, that student is automatically EL. And we just can't say enough that the only thing, regardless of what a home language survey says, and a home language survey does reflect bilingual funding, and we'll talk about that here later, but the only thing that can actually code a student EL or move a student out of EL status is a WIDA assessment, a WIDA screener or the model moving them into EL status, and then either the access or the alternate access moving them out of status. The home language survey, for the purposes of EL, just acts as a flag for that student potentially being English learner. And the district has to go through the steps to make sure that student is assessed correctly to establish that status.
Okay, so developing on that, then the responses given on the home language survey determine bilingual funding status, and they flag students for potential EL screening. It doesn't determine EL status. The 2019-2020 Bilingual Count Verification Packet outlines the general rules concerning basic identification and is also available on the OSDE website at sde.ok.gov/title-Roman numeral 3. And remember, all EL students are considered bilingual, but not all bilingual students are necessarily ELs. So some issues that have come up in the past that we're aware of is hyphenation. Parents don't always answer just one language per question, so they may put English hyphen Spanish. In such cases, the district may default to the language other than English for the purposes of bilingual funding, and then may default to English with appropriate test data for purposes of exempting a student from EL screening. So while hyphenation is allowed, it's kind of messy, and districts should make every reasonable effort to ensure parents and guardians understand the 3 home language survey questions and answer with a single response for each. So then, establishing status on the home language survey, if 2 or more of the 3 language responses are a language other than English, then the student is considered more often and automatically qualifies for bilingual aid. If a language other than English is indicated only once on the 3 language responses, the student is considered less often and qualifies for bilingual aid if they also meet one of the following criteria. So if they answered a language other than English once and the student scores below proficiency on the WIDA screener exam, in this case, the student is also classified as EL. Or if they answer a language other than English only once and have a score of basic or below basic on the previous year's state testing program English Language Arts test, or they have a score at or below the 35th percentile composite reading score from the spring of the previous school year on a state-approved norm-referenced test. Okay, there are only 2 of those. That's the RSA K through 3 approved assessments or the Driven to Read approved assessments. So to sum up, if on the home language survey 2 or more of the answers are language other than English, then the student is automatically qualified as bilingual. If only one of them is a language other than English and they meet one of these other 3 criteria, then they are categorized as bilingual. Okay, some other issues that have come up. Sometimes parents and guardians provide questionable responses on the home language survey. That is beyond our control. Parents may feel the need to provide responses on the home language survey that do not accurately reflect true linguistic status of the student. In situations where the home language survey changes for a current EL student, the new home language survey has no effect on a previous classification of English language learner. Now, note the issue and attach the new home language survey to the previous one in the student's files. And this also applies to students arriving from another district with conflicting status and home language survey responses. Note the issue and file the home language survey in the cumulative folder. Responses on the home language survey do not directly affect EL status. Only a WIDA assessment can classify a student as EL. And one last issue here. Issues also arise when parents of students formerly classified as ELs submit a new home language survey, changing all of the responses or 2 of the responses to English. This can end bilingual status for the student. Okay, in these cases, really the only thing you can do is for districts to make a concerted effort to contact the parents and ensure that the home language survey is truly representative of student status.
Yeah, I'd like to just chime in on this one. This can happen. Usually what will happen in situations like this is that you'll have a student that's a former EL that was on their initial home language survey, like a Spanish, or 3 languages other than English. They were WIDA, they tested WIDA, they were identified as EL, they tested out, but that home language survey still qualified them as more often status for bilingual funding. And then the district will get a new home language survey in that changes all those responses to English. Well, in that particular case, that home language survey is not affecting the EL status because the student's already been moved out of EL status, but it does now affect the bilingual funding because that funding is based off the most recently received home language survey. So in this case, it will happen that then in cases like this, what we recommend is that districts have a conversation with parents and kind of, make sure that everyone understands which dominoes drop in which way when things like this happen, and try to make sure that the home language survey that you have on file is the most representative of the true linguistic nature and status of that student.
Okay. Did you want to pull up the home language survey and walk through that? Okay,
we're going to go ahead and pull up the packet and just run through it real quick to give everyone an idea of what is in there. So we're going to go to the State Department website. We're going to hover over Services. We're going to drop down to Federal Programs. Over here on the Federal Programs page, we have a title, all the different title boxes. We're going to click Title 3. I'm going to click on Part A, Language Instruction. And then right in here, we have the 2019-2020 Bilingual Count Verification Packet. Go ahead and open that up. Okay. So we provide this packet every year as a guidance document for identification, home language survey identification, bilingual status, and then the coding that goes along with this. So we're going to go right to the home language survey right here. This is the accepted format for the home language survey. It's changed slightly for this past year because of the WIDA scoring changes that we implemented at the state for the 17-18 year. Before we had a composite and literacy, and that was reflected in the student use only section down here. But now, since we're just a 4.8 exit composite, we changed that section. And we also changed the score bands for OSTP, which changed when we went to the OSTP from the OCCTs. Now we're the basic, below basic, proficient, and advanced. Other than that, the survey itself is pretty much the same. So if you do have an older version of the survey, that's usually not a problem. We just try to keep it updated as things change. But like we said, as long as you have a valid survey coming from at minimum the 16-17 year, generally speaking, you're fine. Again, when parents fill these out by hand, we can get hyphenated answers, and Tom went over kind of what the process is when that happens. But we would recommend that if parents fill out documentation and when they bring it back to the school and they hand it to somebody, that it's not just taken and then put in a folder so you have to deal with this after the fact. This should be something that's reviewed really quickly just by the entry, whoever's doing your entry paperwork. And if they do see a hyphenated answer, just to kind of stop there real quick, just touch base with the parents, say we really prefer one way or another on this. Would you feel comfortable? And, have a conversation. You don't need to be, we can be polite about everything. Just say, if at all possible, we would like to get a single answer on this rather than hyphenating a response. It does make it easier for you, and it takes some of the gray area out of the process. Okay. For people, especially people that are doing this in smaller districts that are kind of handling this all by themselves, the next 3 pages are pretty important because all of bilingual funding and all of EL status are based on, correct tracking of this is based on correctly coding the students in the local student information system so that information is correctly uploaded to the WAVE. If that's not done correctly, it can hurt your site level or your district level funding because you won't get students coded correctly, and it can also affect your accountability because you might not have students being tested when they're being counted. They could be counted in your site for a specific indicator. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to ensure that you are following the process and getting students coded correctly. This flow chart will help you kind of figure that out. All you got to do is follow the lines, and it'll tell you exactly what the criteria are for students getting coded what number. And one thing I want to highlight here is that for better or worse, there's, I think right now, 15 student information systems in place in the state of Oklahoma. we don't know what all the coding looks like on your particular side, whether you're using Infinite Campus or PowerSchool or WenGauge or whoever. We don't know what what theoretically 2349 is in that particular system. We don't know if it's a checkbox or part of a drop-down menu or a button, or we just don't know. But what we do know is that every single system that does business in the state of Oklahoma has the capacity to code a student 2349 and send that information to the WAVE. So what I would really recommend you do, and this is for people that are veterans as well as people that are new in this system, is to contact your vendor for your student information system. Go through this packet and say, okay, if I need a student 2349, I need to know exactly what button gets checked or checkbox gets checked in this system to ensure that that is accurate. I would strongly recommend that you do that. It's not a very long conversation. The tech support for your particular student information system should be able to tell you that with relative ease. It shouldn't be that big a deal for them. So again, this is here as your resource to kind of follow the flow chart to make sure that your students are coded correctly. And we even break it down a little bit further to make sure that you're coding students correctly given their particular criteria. This is even to the point, say, are these questions right here, the English only, or this right here, then this student is coded 1633, does not qualify for bilingual. We break it down through these charts to make sure that everyone has a pretty good idea of exactly how this process operates. And again, if this can be a little bit convoluted, Oklahoma has a relatively complicated system that kind of conflates state level funding and EL status. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to give either Tom or I a call, and we can walk you through just about any issue. And redesignation. Since Oklahoma statute allows students that are no longer EL status to still receive bilingual funding from the state, that has to be coded in a very specific way. And this is what we had referred to previously on the slide, where parents can come in and change a home language survey for those students that were more often, but now all of a sudden they pop up with an English home language survey. That would exempt them now from bilingual funding. So theoretically, you could have a student, under current state law, exit EL status but still maintain bilingual funding for the duration of time in your district if they're still on a more often survey that was completed in the 16-17 year or later. But they have to be coded correctly in order to do that. So this page tells you, basically ensures that you understand which codes equal the correct coding for that particular year of student. So if you have a student that exits out of EL status by either through the score band process on WIDA or hits their composite target on the WIDA access test, then they get to be reclassified. Now they're no longer classified as EL. Now they're classified as either redesignated or monitor students or former ELs. There's a bunch of different terminology in there, but they have to be recoded. All those terms mean that they recode to 1630. Lost my train of thought. 1636. Yeah, 1636 with the appropriate other code, and that other code designates whether or not they receive bilingual funding or not. And that other code is based on OSTP testing, other testing that might be available for justifying that student still receiving bilingual funding after testing proficient on the WIDA access test. So again, the importance of coding is not just academic, it directly applies to the funding level that your district might receive through state aid. And we'll go ahead and finish out here. And again, just one more reminder, it is time well spent to have a conversation with your vendor to ensure that everything that is in this packet, that you understand exactly how it translates to your local system. I wish we had the ability to kind of look at everyone's system and know exactly how to tell you to code it, but the vendors don't give us access like that. Oftentimes we're just limited to descriptions of what people can give us over the phone and making a guess, and that's really not where anyone wants to be. So like I said, I would have that conversation with your vendor and make sure that everyone is coded appropriately. And we'll go ahead and back out of that.
So I think we need to move on to the second half of our double bill here.
Oh, we're going to do it as two separates, I think.
Okay,
So we can see
let's
if there's-
not do that then.
Let's see if we can do it. See if there's any, go through here and click the project button.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's
Do you want
just,
to? Okay.
And close?
And then we can do and see if there's any questions that we need to
Okay.
answer. All right. Gary, can you show us where the chat box on questions is?
I wasn't seeing anything back there yet, but you never know.
Okay. So we have a few extra minutes. If anyone has any questions they'd like to fire away in the chat box. Otherwise, we can go ahead and wrap up. And we're going to go ahead and record a separate webinar for the ELAP.
Let's go ahead and start that one.
Okay. Let's go ahead and wrap it up.